I would expect him to take over as the number one guy within his rookie year.
Okay. So my bold prediction for the Titans is that they're going to win the division and make the playoffs. Right. Like, I'm not high on Anthony Richardson with the Colts. I think the Colts have a good roster minus the quarterback. I'm not sold on Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville. And we're about to cover the Texans, and I think there's going to be a reversion to the mean. But, Owen, what would be your description of the Texans' offensive scheme?
Yeah, so they made a big change this past season when it came to their offensive play caller. Bobby Slowick went from C.J. Stroud's rookie season as being like one of these potential head coaching candidates to someone who's now out of a job and is the passing game coordinator for the Miami Dolphins. So we're going to see a big change when it comes to what they're going to be running, specifically as it caters more towards what C.J. Stroud likes to do. Because they got away from it a little bit, and you could tell that. So for me, I wasn't the biggest fan of how their passing game was being run, specifically through C.J. Stroud. I felt like his rookie year, while it was really good, he got a lot of turnover luck, and you saw the regression back to the mean a bit this year when it came to getting some of that turnover luck back and having the offensive line not really keep up around him, and his play beginning to look more like that of a younger quarterback on a team that's still building up its prospects. So with the players they've added and the kind of compliments they went towards through the draft of free agency, my best guess is they're going to go and look at being more of a spread it out kind of offense and have some more multiple looking fronts with the receivers. They have Jaden Higgins, who's 6'4", but runs crisp routes, can be more of a separator on the outside. Nico Collins, who's another big body outside threat type player. Christian Kirk, Jalen Noel as two very different types of slot receiver bodies. John Mechie, Tank Dell whenever he comes back. Like, they've added players there that give them more multiple fronts, and they're going to be more so of a spread zone running and allowing CJ Stroud to work some more intermediate throws and some of the stuff that he felt more comfortable running at Ohio State, as opposed to what they were kind of going through with Bobby Slowick, where it was a lot more fullback inclusion, bigger personnel with the tight ends. Dalton Schultz was heavily in the passing game last year, and you could see a lot of that was not really meshing well with CJ. And like I said, he reverted back to the mean because of that. So I do think they're going to air it out a bit more and create more space, manufactured space, which is what you saw with their investments as well.
So, Drew, how about you? I know that you didn't you were coming on for the Titans, so the Texans might be a little bit outside of the wheelhouse, but how would you describe the Titans' offense from where you sit?
Yeah, obviously I'm not quite as in tune with Houston's schemes I am Tennessee. Still being in the same division, I have a general idea. I think Owen nailed it on a general basis, and I think, again, this is where you see what I was talking about earlier, where your personnel kind of drives a lot of your scheme decisions. For a team that has comfortably one of the most talented receiver units in the league, and a team that's kind of shown a complete disregard for their offensive line situation, for a team that had one of the more brutal offensive line situations last year, and then continued to make it worse over the offseason. That's going to be your path to success, is to get in those empty sets, spread it out, spread defenses out, and get things wide, and make those quick decisions, take some of the pressure off your offensive line and put it more on the mental strain on CJ Stroud. And I think he can handle it. I think Stroud's one of the better guys in this league from a mental processing standpoint. And obviously, like we just mentioned, they have the receiving talent to handle that level of scheme, or that type of scheme. So yeah, I think exactly what Owen said. We're spreading it out and getting in those quick empty sets, and kind of centering your offense around that kind of air attack is going to be the way they kind of handle their personnel limitations this year.
And just to add some depth to that, because I knew I had Bobby Slowick pulled up, forgetting that he got fired. So I pulled up Nick Caley. His previous stops as a coach, immediately outside of college, he was at New England from 2015 to 2022, working different positions, whether it was offensive assistant, tight ends coach, fullbacks coach. So he has some implements in some of those bigger settings and bigger personnel typings, especially with being at that in the later stages of the Tom Brady Patriots as well as working with a team that likes to run that when Belichick was there. But then also he was the tight ends coach and passing coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams last season, and that's where he got this opportunity to be the offensive coordinator for the Texans. And I don't think looking back at the Rams passing game last year, you would or their marriage of the pass to the run as well. You didn't see an obvious case of them going towards more run heavier systems than you would have seen any other year the Rams were running the offense. Now, again, Sean McVay's the play caller there and establishes what the offense is going to do. But I think I would envision that that's going to be more so what they're going to lean towards offensively. I do think they're still going to have some more power rushing elements because they do have fullbacks, they do have multiple tight ends in the roster. They have Kaylee coming from that Patriots background, but at the same time, the Patriots utilize a lot of slot receivers with options, allowing their quarterback to use his intelligence to attack zone coverages and make decisions for them on the field and let them really go out there and play, not just strict play formats. So I think that's what they're going to look to pull from between his stops in New England as a player who worked in that passing game, as well as being the passing game coordinator of the Rams last year. So while I do think as an offensive coordinator, you may see some more power rushing stuff with Joe Mixon and now Nick Chubb being added. You have some more bigger bodies that can carry that kind of load. You're still going to see some more space and slot receiver-oriented passing game concepts.
Okay. Let's dive into the Texans' offensive line for a little bit. So Laramie Tunsil was traded. I believe that was an off-season trade, right? That was not trade deadline. That was off-season. I guess in July that all bleeds together. Did that happen in November or did it happen in March?
I know. It happened like March-ish time, I think.
Yeah. So they've signed Cam Robinson. They've signed Laken Tomlinson. And they drafted Ariante Ursery. So, Drew, what was your assessment of Ariante Ursery?
Yes, I was one of the people. I liked him. I was a little bit lower on him in the consensus, but not like dramatically by any means. I still liked him. I saw him more as a guy that I thought could stay on the outside if you really needed him to, but I think his future is probably more successful at guard. He was extremely powerful. Obviously, one of the best punches in that whole draft class. I thought he was a little bit limited athletically and foot speed wise. That's why I kind of liked him more on the interior. I do really worry about him he looks to be a guy they expect to be an early starter, maybe not day one, but it's probably sometime in year one. And that really worries me because I think he's a guy that's got a lot of technical refinement to go before he's ready to take on an NFL role immediately. So I think of all the tackles, and also I know the Titans met with him and weren't particularly impressed with his mental state as a player either. So or maturity level, I should say. So if they're a guy, if they're expecting him to be a guy to start kind of remedy some of those offensive line problems, especially on the outside, as an offensive tackle early on in his career, I think that's probably going to end relatively poorly because, again, I think he's just a guy that's got a lot of technical refinement to go before he's ready for that. But the ceiling is high with him. I do see the projection and end goal with him. I think the ceiling is high.
So, Owen, how about you? How do you see Ariante Ursery and the other offensive line acquisitions in Houston?
So, I'm a bit confused as to what they added a ton of bodies. They added guys who have started games in the league. They have Cam Robinson, projected left tackle, Laken Tomlinson, projected left guard, and then their right side, including their pivot center, are all going to be guys who are returning between Jared Patterson, Titus Howard, and Blake Fisher. I think Titus Howard's the only one I'm genuinely confident in being a quality starter for them. Everyone else is kind of a question mark, especially Blake Fisher at right tackle. And then behind those three guys, they brought in Jake Andrews from New England, who was a good player when healthy. It's just going to be the when healthy part. He's going to be able to come in and take that center job. He's going to be one of the other guards, or going to be the other guard opposite Titus Howard. We'll see what they can actually get out of Jake Andrews after adding him to free agency. Ed Ingram, once upon a time, a favorite of mine from LSU when he was coming out of the draft. Now, after a few years in Minnesota, it hasn't worked. And I don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be able to come in here, play alongside some other question marks on offensive line and make it magically work. And then they brought in Trent Brown as a backup, again, another former Patriots player that their offensive coordinator will be familiar with. I don't think you can really get a lot out of him at this point in his career. So for me, Ursery is the one player that they brought in that I'm excited to see how he fits in. And that's coming from someone who didn't love Ursary as a prospect. Like, he has size and a punch, and he can move a little bit. I think I agree. I think his movement would be better, more of a plus if he was a guard than a tackle. But I do think he has the length and size to play tackle with some heavy hands. But he does have a ton of technical issues. And for someone who started as many games as he did in Minnesota and still have technical issues, I'm not sure how much better you can really anticipate him getting now that the game is speeding up, being faster, and he has to learn on the fly in the NFL, especially if he's the one who's going to be pushing Blake Fisher for that starting job at right tackle. So, again, outside of Titus Howard and maybe Lincoln Tomlinson, I'm not super sold on any of the options they have currently starting or, pushing the starters for playing time. I really don't see how this isn't one of the worst offensive lines in the league, despite the many additions they did make this season.
Drew, anything to add to that?
No, just kind of emphasizing everything Owen said. I think, exactly where you're expecting Ursary to compete for that right tackle spot. I think that's a great point about him starting that as many games as he did in college and still having all of the technical shortcomings that he does. I just think that their strategy to solving this offensive line, if you want to say that, has been really confusing. And I worry for CJ Stroud's well-being after this year.
And there was a theme as to why I was saying right as we pivoted to this segment where I was saying, I think this division is wide open. I see a regression. I think the Texans will be average. I don't think they're going to be bad, but the way that they're putting the offensive line together in front of a quarterback on a rookie deal, like when I was doing mock drafts for the Texans, I almost always grabbed 2 offensive linemen, and it wouldn't have been a bad mock if you had taken 3. And they took 1. Now, granted, they also needed wide receivers, and they did draft 2, right? Because they took Higgins and they took Knoll. So they had some holes on offense. I like the additions at wide receiver, but I'm definitely not sold on the offensive line. I think when you're grabbing veterans that were in a Pro Bowl 4 years ago, okay, there's a reason that they were free agents, right? Because you don't see, my opinion is that good offensive linemen do not hit the free agency wire.
Exactly. And it's
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but it's back to the Dan Moore thing with Tennessee to bring it back to the Titans. People, you see that $82 million number on Dan Moore. Everybody, flipped their lids when you saw that number attached to Dan Moore for pretty good reason, because he's not an $82 million a year football player. But when you look at offensive tackles, good offensive tackles, like you just said, good offensive linemen in general, but especially offensive tackles, don't hit free agency. So when any, offensive linemen do, it's like good offensive tackles get paid like superstars, and starting caliber offensive linemen, like middle of the road, like Dan Moore is probably top 16 at best. And he's getting paid $82 million a year just because he's a starting caliber tackle that hit free agency. So, I mean, you have to build your offensive line through the draft. It's impossible to build it through free agency.
That's a statement that we need to repeat on a lot of podcasts. You have to build your offensive line through the draft. So one of the players that we have in common, Drew, is Bobby Hart. To throw a name out there from the past. Do you remember Bobby Hart with the Titans?
Unfortunately, I do. We had Bobby Hart, Dennis Daly, and Andre Dillard all in a 3-year span. Back then, they were all 3 competing for the worst starting NFL tackle in NFL history. It was a brutal stretch there for a minute. I think Tennessee has thoroughly learned their lesson about trying to get tackles anywhere other than the draft.
Yep. So I wonder if Owen's battery runs out, because it could be his cat. Sometimes Owen's cat takes out his computer. But we can close this out. Before we close it out, actually, Drew, do you want to let everybody know who you are and how they can find all of the different content? You're on a lot of podcasts, and I know you write for a couple of places. So let us know what you're up to.
Yeah, I'm stretched pretty thin right now across a couple different places. So everything that I'm doing will be posted and/or linked in my Twitter at Iron City Film, right down there. Twitter, X, whatever it is. I'll never get used to that. Yeah, you can find it all there, linked, posted. Everything should be there. All my draft coverage, all my Titans coverage. I do all my Titans writing right now over at Titansized.com, fan side of Titan coverage team. I'm doing a breakdown series right now on each of their draft picks. So all the guys we talked about today, I've done in-depth breakdown articles on all of them or have them in the works right now. Yeah, you can find me there. I will hopefully be back regularly on this podcast every week, Tuesday nights. Definitely in August, hopefully sooner, possibly. We'll see where the timeline ends on that. But yeah, I'm stretched on a couple of different podcasts, but you can find everything at my Twitter or X at Iron City Field.
Oh, and you want to let everybody know how they can find all of your content.
Yeah, sorry, Wi-Fi dropped out there, so I hope my phone hotspot can stay consistent now. But yeah, you can find me here on Mondays and Wednesdays on Draft Professor. On Mondays, we're doing breakdowns of different college teams and going over kind of season previews of the prospects that are going to be on those teams, and give you even like a team preview itself, having some of the local fans or draft professors that talk about those teams or follow those teams, come on and talk about them on top of us scouting the players and talking about them that way. You can find that on Mondays. And on Wednesdays, obviously, you can see us doing scheme fits here. When this ends on Wednesdays, I will continue on Wednesdays, but instead, that'll be when we start doing our weekly draft profiles of D linemen with me here, with whoever ends up coming in for Newt while he's still out coaching, and then eventually my good friend Newt will be back for our typical Wednesday slot here talking about defensive linemen. So that's what you can expect from me here on the Draft Professor. But as well, I have the YouTube channel at Weekly Huddle, as well as on Twitter at Weekly Huddle, where you can find me and some of the other draft professors putting out content that involves draft-related things or just other football-related topics. Recently on the Draft Professor, I had Newt post his top 10 offensive tackles. We had the top 10 interior offensive linemen coming up soon. Me and Bill are going to be having a 2026 mock draft drop soon. I have to finish up making the graphics for that, as well as I'm starting a series where I go through and watch the film of notable draft busts and draft steals of recent draft classes and break down on the film why we missed on them, whether as a bust or a steal, and if that was visible in the film itself or if it was something that happened post in their playing career that made that be the wrong pick in one way or another. For a teaser, the first episode I have recorded and just have to edit up now is on Jalen Reagor, and I genuinely, watching his film, have not watched it during that draft cycle, watching it now back, without ignoring hindsight, I have like a 5th round grade on him. He was not a 1st round player in that TCU offense in the slightest. I don't know what the hell the Eagles were doing there, but that's some other stuff you can look forward to catching on the Weekly Huddle YouTube channel, which we do post semi-frequently, more so now than we did before.
Yeah. So you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. And the channel has daily draft content. So there are 22 people at Draft Professor, like Drew and Owen, that podcast once a week. And by everybody going once a week, it makes us all look really good, right? Because the channel just keeps going. So this week, we start a Sunday podcast, and in 2 weeks, we start a Saturday podcast, which means we're going to be up to 7 days a week. So what you're getting, like Owen said, Mondays and Tuesdays, we're breaking down specific schools. We did Oklahoma, and I actually listened to the Oklahoma episode again today on my way into work. That actually came out really well. Like, you can just listen to it, and you're going to hear 4 people breaking down. I'm going to say it was 16 players. It may have been 12. I lost count. But if you just want to hear an assessment of 12 players in the draft, all on Oklahoma, give it a listen. One of the podcasters was an Oklahoma fan. He's also a draft professor. Ironically, a Titans fan too. Yeah. So it's a good listen, and you're going to get multiple opinions because there were players like, somebody says I've got a day 2 grade. Somebody else says I've got a late day 3. So you will hear differing grades on players, and that's kind of what we're about here at the Draft Professor. Wednesdays and Thursdays, we've been breaking down schemes. We're about to finish that and pivot to other content. Fridays, we're breaking down quarterbacks. And like Owen said, Bill Sparks and Newt Weston have appeared on Owen's channel. I think Sam Teets has appeared on Owen's channel as well in the past. So other draft professors will be on the Weekly Huddle. Go ahead and hit a subscribe there. Drew is, I'm just going to say all over. And I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, that's accurate right now.
Yeah. So we have a group chat in the Draft Professor, and I think at least 4 or 5 people in that group chat work with Drew on other places, whether it was Stadium Rant
I think so, yeah.
or Fantasy Trading Room and other things like there. So it's definitely Draft Professor is a community. The people are coming at us from a lot of different directions. And 22 of those 80 podcasts once a week help us put out content. You will see Drew on this channel typically on Tuesday nights with Parker. Their position specialty is offensive line, and they have the late night show. So Tuesday nights late, you can catch Drew and Parker. Owen will be here with Newt. He is Bill Sparks doing the warm-up, doing the opening act. And then Newt and Owen will be breaking down defensive linemen at night. And that will be starting on Wednesdays in October. So that being said, Owen's back. Do you want to break down the Texans' defensive scheme for us, Owen?
Sure, yeah. And then I have a last like wrap up thing with the offense, maybe as a team as a whole that I can respond to your take with at the end here, Jim. But yeah, moving into the defense, obviously not much has changed here. Their head coach is a defensive-minded head coach, and they had a strong defensive system last year, which we're expecting to come back again. They're an even front defense. You see that with 2 consistent edges in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, who they're paying Danielle Hunter handsomely and will be paying Will Anderson handsomely soon, as well as having your typical 3-tech, 1-tech balance of D tackles with Tim Settle Jr. as a 3-tech and Folo Fadukasi as their 1-tech, as well as some good depth behind all 4 of those players, between Derek Burnett, whatever you're going to get out of him from Philadelphia, Darrell Taylor from Chicago, Daniel Autry from the Titans, Mario Edwards, Jr., Sheldon Rankins, like good defensive line depth for this front that already has really strong starters. And then when you move back to the second level, you have Azeez Al-Shaair, who I think has taken over from Vontaze Burfict as like most hated linebacker in the league since last season, when he took a couple cheap shots, had a suspension last year. But he is a solid middle of the field linebacker, run stuffing plugger. And then Christian Harris, who's more of that weak side, movable matchup linebacker specifically. And they're able to run 2 linebackers because they have one of the best nickel safety hybrids. And one of my guys is one of my favorite players I've ever scouted, and Jalen Petrie out of Baylor at the nickel spot. He was like a strong safety type player at Baylor, played their star role, and he's kind of found a home as that nickel back in the secondary that also has Kamari Lassiter, who was a really solid rookie last year. Derek Stingley Jr. was one of the better corners in the NFL. And then they have, in addition to CJ Gardner-Johnson, who can kind of play that similar role to Petrie. So there's going to be some flexibility between the two of them, moving back and forth and having some disguised looks there, who's in the slot, who's playing strong safety. And then Kalen Bullock, who's also a young player who had some good play in the last season. So they are a very, very good defense, built from the front to the back with talent. I think their weakest spots are at the second level, and even then, they're not that bad. And they have depth there with EJ Speed coming over from Indy, Nick Niemann from the Chargers. They have guys who have starting experience as their backups. So, and Henry To'o, whenever they do run more of a 3 linebacker look. So I think this team is stacked at all 3 levels defensively. Maybe again at the second level, not super studded in the starters, but with depth. And you have a team that is going to win a lot of games off that defense alone. And their scheme is similar to like more of the modern nickel defenses, where they have guys who can play the run and still be some of the smaller DB players.
I'll definitely agree. I think that the Houston defense is stacked. I'm down on Houston because I don't think they did enough on offense. Drew, do you have anything to add on how you see the Houston defense?
No, again, I think Owen nailed it. Again, I think it's kind of the polar opposite of what we talked about at the beginning of this with Tennessee, where you have so much schematic freedom because that pass rushing unit is so elite and one of the best in the entire league. Starts at the edge, but again, like you mentioned, Owen, they have so much depth in the interior too. That it just frees up so much of what you can do when you have the talent they do in the secondary and in the front seven. When you have an edge room like they do, it frees up so much of what you can do on defense. They're going to be a really scary defensive unit, like you mentioned, at all three levels of the field. So yeah, I think you nailed it.
And to build on Owen's, the defense is the strength of the team. So the Texans had 11 draft picks. If I just added that up right, 2, 4, 6, 8, they had 9 draft picks. Out of the 9 draft picks, only 3 were on defense. So typically, if you have 8 draft picks and if you do 4 offense and 4 defense, it's biased to the offense. So a tie goes to the offense because generally speaking on offense, you have 6 players that play 100% of the snaps. Your 5 offensive linemen and your quarterback don't come off the field. So any draft that is equal offense and defense is actually biased to the offense. So the fact that the Texans draft was 6 offense to 3 defense tells you that they are looking to overhaul the offense. They are, like, to me, this is an overhaul draft. They might be resetting a little bit, but if there's a division you can reset in, it's the AFC South, right? Like I said, I'm not high on specifically Jacksonville and Indy with their specific quarterback situations. So this, I agree. I think the defense here looks really good. If you had to look at like Jalen Reed mixing in with those safeties, Owen, do you see a path for him to make the field this year?
It's tough because they have him specifically to be the kind of that backup strong safety role, and kind of like what I was talking about where with Petrie and Gardner Johnson, that they're very similar players. So I feel like if Gardner Johnson were to go out, they'd more likely switch Petrie back to be their strong safety and then have Miles Bryant be their starting nickel. So even in the cases of injury to one of those 2 guys, I do think he's going to struggle to find the field, at least this year. I do think he's a good enough player to eventually take over for that, and you could see him maybe developing into more of a free safety type. I don't think that's really his game, so maybe he's just a long-term play for when they don't want to pay C.J. Gardner-Johnson following this. I don't know how much is left on his contract. I can probably pull that up really quickly, but I'm assuming because they acquired him through trade, it's going to be whatever his existing contract was with Philly, which probably isn't in for the long haul, I should say. So I think he may be the longer-term answer for them. So I don't think you're going to see a ton of them this year, but as a long-term play, you could definitely see that being why they went out and invested there specifically. Like, they only invested 3 picks in defense. And if you're going to do that, you want them to be guys who can rotate it eventually or eventually be down the line starters. And I do think that would be something they'd be looking to do. And I just pulled up his contract here. Now there are 3 void years so he's under contract until 2026, but there's an out after this upcoming season where they can cut him and take 0 dead cap and save another $1.3 million on the cap. And then there's like 4 void years after that. So this is looking like that'll probably be a one and done with the Texans, especially with their draft investment to Jalen Reed, that maybe Gardner Johnson is not long for this team this season, and it's kind of more the transitionary piece for Jalen Reed to step in and be the starter next year.
And Owen, I want to give you a shout out. So I see the Cheektowaga sweatshirt. My parents lived in Cheektowaga when I was born. So just want to give that shout out.
Cheektowaga This is a little outdated, but it's Cheektowaga Chargers now. That's the team I'm coaching for this year. So on my alma mater as well. We got the helmet in the background.
Okay, well, we are going to wrap this podcast up. For Drew, for Owen, for myself, for the 80 podcasters at Draft Professor, thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow.